In the beginning, there was light, not the light of stars, but the light of civilization, a brilliance so vast, so enduring, that entire generations were born and died without ever knowing darkness. They called it the Galactic Empire. 12,000 years of unbroken dominion spanning the spiral arms of the Milky Way. 1,000,000 worlds, 1,000,000,000,000 cities, all bound under a single banner. It was not merely a government, it was order itself. And at its heart lay Trantor, the immortal city, a planet so completely consumed by human ambition that not a single blade of grass remained. Steel upon steel, dome upon dome, from orbit it shimmered, not like a world, but like a machine forged by gods. But even gods rust. There's a saying whispered by historians of 1,000 ages. The moment an empire believes it will last forever, the clock of its death begins to tick. So let us ask the unthinkable. How does something that spans the galaxy die? Not in a single day, not in a single war, but slowly, imperceptibly, from within. What if the most advanced civilization in history, the one that conquered hunger, war, and disease, fell not from rebellion, but from entropy? You are about to witness the story of that fall, a saga that begins not with fire, but with calculation, not with rebellion, but with prophecy. A story of one man, Hari Seldon, who dared to predict the death of eternity itself. Because when the empire began to crack, it wasn't the sound of war drums that echoed across Trantor's metal skies. It was the quiet click of numbers falling into place. Imagine the heart of the galaxy, a planet-sized metropolis wrapped in gleaming metal, its air thick with the ozone of machinery, the hum of gravitic trains, the echo of 10 billion lives moving in mechanical rhythm. From orbit, it is perfect symmetry, a shining orb of civilization. From within, it is suffocating perfection. Every corridor polished, every schedule regulated, every citizen recorded. Bureaucracy has become religion, paperwork, liturgy. And yet, in the corridors of power, whispers crawl like rot under chrome. Ships arriving later than planned, worlds on the rim refusing taxes, senators sleeping through their sessions while provinces starve. The machine is still running, but no one remembers how to maintain it. There is a pattern to decay. Rome had its emperors, its marble decadence. Britain had its colonies, its illusions of permanence. And the Galactic Empire, it had Trantor. Trantor, where the sun never touched soil, where even the stars were hidden beneath a ceiling of duralium, where the empire's greatest minds once wrote laws that bound 1,000,000 worlds, and now spend their lives arguing over the correct formatting of a requisition order. This is how civilizations die, not with rebellion, but with red tape. But before we descend into that decay, let's step back, because there was a time, long ago, when the empire earned its immortality. 12,000 years before the fall, explorers spread from Earth, the forgotten cradle of humanity. They crossed the void, carrying language, culture, memory, and ambition. They settled new worlds, and then more, until even historians lost count. To govern such a vast network, they built Trantor, a world turned inward, a machine of governance. It became a miracle, a single planet coordinating the fate of billions. And for millennia, it worked. The empire brought peace, trade, prosperity. The idea of collapse was unthinkable, but all systems, even perfect ones, eventually succumb to the same law. Entropy. Entropy doesn't destroy from outside. It whispers inside the walls, in complacency, in luxury, in the illusion that the machine will run forever because it always has. Trantor forgot its soil, forgot its stars, forgot the scent of real rain. It became a mind trapped inside its own perfection. And like all great minds, it began to go mad. Imagine its halls, kilometers long, gilded with light from energy conduits that never dim. Servants move in silence through air-conditioned tunnels. Senators debate for hours about the price of neutronium, while outside their domes, entire sectors burn in civil unrest. The empire doesn't see the fires. It can't. Its eyes are buried in bureaucracy, its hands busy stamping approval on its own decay. And somewhere, in a small academic wing of the Imperial University, one man begins to notice the pattern. Hari Seldon, a mathematician, quiet, reserved, and yet the most dangerous mind in the galaxy, because he discovers something no one wants to believe. That history itself can be predicted. Through the science of psychohistory, Seldon calculates that the Empire's collapse is not a matter of if, but when. And when it falls, humanity will plunge into 30,000 years of darkness. But Seldon also finds a way out, a path to shorten the coming dark age to a mere 1,000 years, a blueprint for rebirth. He calls it the Seldon Plan, a plan so vast, so audacious, that it will require centuries to unfold. It will begin with an illusion, an encyclopedia project to record all human knowledge, and it will end with the rebirth of civilization itself, if it works. But first, it must survive the wrath of the Empire. The irony is almost poetic. The greatest civilization in history, built on knowledge, is threatened by the one man who understands it best, because truth, in an empire built on illusion, is treason. Trantor's rulers don't fear rebellion. They fear prediction. They fear the idea that destiny is already written, and that their empire is already a ghost, simply waiting to be recognized. So they summon Hari Seldon before the Imperial Council. He stands in the Hall of Judgment, a cathedral of bureaucracy, walls glinting with the light of 1,000 artificial suns, and calmly declares that the Empire will fall within 5 centuries. Silence follows, then laughter, then outrage, but numbers do not bend to pride. The future, once calculated, cannot be uncalculated. As Seldon's trial unfolds, the Empire unknowingly seals its own fate. They do not execute him, that would make him a martyr. Instead, they exile him to the very edge of the galaxy, to a barren world called Terminus. There, under the guise of compiling an Encyclopedia Galactica, Seldon and his followers begin their true work, the birth of the first foundation, the seed of rebirth planted in the ashes of decay. But make no mistake, the collapse is coming. Trantor will burn, worlds will fracture. And for the first time in 12,000 years, humanity will face the abyss of chaos once more. We will see an empire that has forgotten how to die, forced to confront its mortality. We will watch as its brightest minds become priests of bureaucracy. We will meet the traitors, the prophets, the generals who will rise from its ruins. This is not just science fiction, it is prophecy, because every civilization, ancient Rome, imperial China, industrial Britain, even us, believes it is the exception, until it isn't. The lights of Trantor still burn tonight, the empire still lives. But beneath the metal skin, the first cracks are forming. And in those cracks, the seeds of a new future are taking root, one man's numbers against 12,000 years of power. The story begins here, in the shining corridors of eternity, on the night before the first whisper of the fall. In the beginning, Trantor was nothing, just another modest world orbiting an unremarkable sun, a quiet sphere of soil and sky in the galactic heartland. It had no great oceans, no rings, no breathtaking anomalies. It was a world of potential, and potential is invisible until history sets it aflame. When humanity first reached the stars, each colony carried with it a fragment of Earth, language, memory, the yearning for order. And when that order began to scatter across the spiral arms, there arose a question older than any empire. How do you rule 1,000,000 worlds? The answer was Trantor. Here, on this quiet planet, early emperors saw opportunity, a central location from which to govern, a neutral world that could rise above the petty rivalries of frontier colonies. They began to build. At first, palaces, then archives, then ministries. Soon, bureaucracies multiplied like veins beneath a skin of steel. Every new decade brought more towers, more domes, more tunnels. The soil disappeared under metal. The air was filtered, the rivers redirected into subterranean conduits, the last trees preserved in glass museums. By the time the empire was 1,000 years old, Trantor had become a living machine.
Its construction was not just monumental, it was holy. Entire worlds shipped raw materials to feed its endless appetite: titanium from Rigel, hyperglass from Aurora, neutronium from the Pleiades. Each ton of cargo carried a piece of another planet's identity, melted and refashioned into Trantor's skin. It took millennia, but when the final continent vanished beneath the gleaming canopy, humanity beheld its triumph, a world without wilderness. From orbit, Trantor was a miracle, a sphere of light wrapped in silver and circuitry pulsing with life. The Emperor's palace rose like a mountain of gold amid a cityscape stretching beyond the horizon. Beneath it, the Imperial archives expanded for kilometers, storing not just records, but memory itself, the living brain of civilization. And within those metallic veins, more than 40 billion souls lived their entire lives without ever seeing an open sky. They didn't need to, they had something greater: purpose. The early centuries of Trantor's ascendancy were an age of divine order. The bureaucracy, vast, layered, unstoppable, became a kind of religion. Clerks were its monks, administrators its high priests. To sign a decree was to shape the fate of worlds.
Here, in these marble corridors, wars were declared, taxes levied, treaties born and forgotten. The hum of data streams replaced the sound of prayer. Trantor ruled not by sword, but by system, and for centuries it worked. The Empire brought peace. Planets that once waged endless war were now bound by trade and law. Pirates became traders, warlords became governors. For the first time in history, humanity believed it had mastered chaos, but nothing built to last forever can ever truly last forever. As centuries passed, Trantor began to bend under its own perfection. The bureaucracy that once served as the Empire's strength became its weight. Files piled upon files. Committees birthed committees. Entire ministries existed solely to interpret the output of other ministries. The very thing that made Trantor invincible, its control, became the reason it could no longer move. And yet it was beautiful, the heart of a civilization still beating, even as it thickened with disease. From the core to the rim, Trantor was worshipped as the center of all things. Children on distant worlds dreamed of its glowing towers. Senators from provincial systems prayed for a posting in its halls. To serve on Trantor was to stand at the edge of immortality itself. But immortality, like all illusions, breeds decay in silence. By the Empire's 12th millennium, the system had calcified. The Emperor ruled, but his words passed through so many hands that by the time they reached their targets, they bore no resemblance to intent. Regional governors grew arrogant. Traders on the periphery grew independent. The outer worlds began to forget what the imperial crest even looked like. And still, Trantor shone, a dying sun whose brilliance blinded its own citizens to the shadows spreading beyond the core. It was inevitable. All empires are stories written by those who believe they've conquered time, but time always edits the ending. History would later call Trantor the navel of humanity. But what is a navel except the scar left from birth? Trantor was not the beginning of the Empire's greatness. It was the scar of its creation, and soon the tomb of its arrogance, because the very world that united the galaxy would one day burn for it. Imagine Trantor from above, a storm of light stretching across the entire horizon. The day never truly ends here. The air hums with power, the ground vibrates with movement. Every breath carries the faint tang of ozone. Every sound echoes through 1,000 layers of metal. There is no wilderness, no horizon, no silence, only the endless murmur of civilization devouring itself. The city breathes in perfect rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing through underground veins of transit tunnels and gravitic conveyors. Workers move in tides through corridors vast enough to swallow mountains. And yet, beneath the awe, something feels wrong. The air is too sterile, the light too artificial. The people move with a precision that feels less like life, more like programming. Trantor has achieved what every society dreams of:
total order, and in doing so has suffocated the chaos that gives meaning to existence. Philosophers of the later foundation would write that Trantor's tragedy was not its fall, but its perfection. When nothing can grow, decay is the only form of change. Every empire, Rome, Byzantium, America, reaches this moment, when its cities gleam brightest, when its citizens are safest, when the old fears are gone, and the new ones, invisible. Look at our world today. The megacities of Earth, Tokyo, Shanghai, New York, towers of glass, billions of lives stacked atop one another. Information flows like air. Machines anticipate our desires before we know them. But beneath that glow, a quiet exhaustion hums. Systems too complex for any one person to understand. Bureaucracies feeding on themselves. Power centralized beyond sight. Trantor is not a distant fantasy. It is a mirror, one showing us the future we might build without realizing it. The deeper you go beneath Trantor's domes, the more haunting the silence becomes. Beneath the glittering surface lies the Undercity, ancient levels abandoned centuries ago, where echoes of older eras linger like ghosts. Here, one can still find forgotten inscriptions, relics of the time when sunlight touched the ground. Dust drifts where once ministers walked. The great ventilation tunnels groan with age. Machines maintain themselves, following orders written by engineers long dead. Civilization has become self-sustaining, self-aware, and utterly detached from the people it was built to serve. The philosopher Oliver Antrax once wrote, "An empire dies not when it loses its armies, but when it forgets why it exists." Trantor had forgotten. It still moved, still functioned, still produced decrees and ships and trade, but without purpose, without vision. It existed because it could not imagine not existing. And so it became a paradox, the most efficient machine ever built, running endlessly toward a goal that no longer mattered. Destiny or decay? The question haunted Seldon and every thinker who dared look beyond the surface. Psychohistory would later describe this mathematically. Civilizations following predictable arcs of rise, stagnation, and collapse. But what Seldon truly uncovered wasn't numbers, it was inevitability. Civilizations, like stars, must burn out to give birth to new ones. And Trantor, in its suffocating splendor, had long since exhausted its fuel. The city remains breathtaking. To a visitor from the Rim, the sight of the imperial palace rising through the eternal night must feel divine. Towers piercing the sky, bridges spanning kilometers, ships landing in constant rhythm. But listen closely. The hum is not the sound of triumph. It's the sound of a machine groaning under its own weight. And somewhere deep within, beneath the palaces and ministries, a mathematician's equations tick quietly, counting down the years to collapse. It begins quietly. A clerk named Doreen Holst, third-generation record officer in the Ministry of Resource Allocation, signs the same report he's signed for 20 years. His office smells faintly of coolant and dust. He has never seen sunlight. He has never needed to. The artificial glow of his terminal is his sunrise, his sunset. He does not know that the report he stamps today, a minor delay in grain shipments from Siena, will ripple across 100 systems, feeding unrest that will one day ignite rebellion. History will not remember Doreen Holst, but his signature will echo in eternity. In another tower, far above the smog-drowned streets, Senator Larn Vero attends yet another gala in the golden halls of the Inner Council. Crystal chandeliers shimmer, wine flows from off-world vineyards. Hollow orchestras play symphonies older than the empire itself. Larn's conversation drifts to rumors, the growing independence of the outer worlds, the talk of inefficiencies in tax collection. But he laughs them off. The empire, he insists, is eternal. How could a machine so vast ever fail? Outside, riots flicker in the lower levels, distant, insignificant, muffled by kilometers of luxury. The sound does not reach the golden halls, not yet. And deep beneath them both, in the forgotten caverns of the Undercity, A scavenger girl named Mara crawls through the ruins of an ancient ventilation shaft. She is 12 years old, born among shadows, raised among the ghosts of Trantor's past. She finds relics, broken circuits, antique coins, fragments of forgotten machines, and sells them to dealers who call them archaeological curiosities. She doesn't know that one of those fragments once belonged to the first computational core of the Imperial Archive. History sleeps around her, buried beneath centuries of dust, while above her head, the empire that buried it begins to die. The last night before Trantor burns does not feel like an ending. It feels like any other night. Freight shuttles hum through sky lanes, clerks file their reports, senators dine in splendor. The city glows like a second sun. Only Hari Seldon, in exile, truly knows what is coming. His plan predicts this moment, the slow decay that will one day accelerate into chaos. But the people of Trantor are blind to prophecy. They believe in eternity. They always have. The fires begin years later, but the death begins here, in apathy, in ignorance, in the quiet moments when no one remembers what the empire was built for. When the fall finally comes, when invaders breach the domes, when the metal skies shatter, when the flames rise from the lower levels and consume the towers, there will be no one left to ask how it happened, because by then Trantor will not be dying. It will simply be catching up to the truth of its own decay. And in the centuries that follow, when the city is ash and ruin, the survivors will whisper of its former glory, a world of light that forgot how to live. Trantor, the heart of a dying empire, the first domino in the collapse of eternity. History rarely announces its revolutions. They begin in silence, a lone mind, a single idea, a whisper that dares to contradict eternity. When Hari Seldon first arrived on Trantor, no one noticed. He was a scholar from the distant world of Helicon, quiet, deliberate, unimposing. To most, he was another mathematician among the billions who served the imperial bureaucracy. One more cog in a machine too vast to care, but in that unremarkable man, a storm was forming. Seldon did not seek power. He sought understanding, the language of history itself. He wondered, could human behavior, in all its chaos and cruelty, be measured? Could the rise and fall of empires be predicted, not by mystics or seers, but by mathematics? At first, the idea was absurd. How could numbers capture ambition, fear, faith? Yet Seldon believed that while individuals were unpredictable, masses were not. Just as atoms obeyed statistical laws, so too did civilizations. And from that belief, psychohistory was born, a science that could turn history into an equation. It began humbly, with probability matrices and models of social entropy. But soon, the data spoke back. Patterns emerged where chaos was assumed. Civilizations rose and fell in waves so mathematically precise they seemed preordained. Seldon's equations revealed something terrifying, that the Galactic Empire, this eternal machine, was approaching irreversible decline. The signs were everywhere: bureaucratic paralysis, economic stagnation, cultural exhaustion. The curve was unmistakable, and if left unchecked, humanity would plunge into 30,000 years of barbarism before civilization rose again. Seldon had discovered fate itself, and it was bleak. But prophecy without hope is cruelty. So he searched for a way to change the curve. Psychohistory did not allow him to alter destiny completely, but it offered one fragile window, a way to shorten the darkness. He called it the Seldon Plan. Its brilliance was staggering: create a structure at the edges of the galaxy, where decay had not yet reached, a place where knowledge could be preserved, nurtured, and used to rebuild. A single spark in the coming night. He proposed 2 such sparks, though only one would be publicly known. The first foundation, on the planet Terminus, a colony disguised as a project to compile an Encyclopedia Galactica, and the second foundation, hidden, secret, its existence known to almost no one, a failsafe, a guiding mind for the centuries ahead. Two pillars, one visible, one shadowed, both essential to humanity's rebirth. To the few who understood his equations, it was divine. To the Empire, it was heresy. Because Seldon's numbers didn't merely predict collapse, they dated it. Within 5 centuries, the Empire would fall. No emperor can hear such words and remain calm. Seldon's ideas spread quietly through Trantor's academic circles, whispered in the corridors of the university, debated in secret among the mathematicians of Streeling's sector. Some called him visionary, others madman. But truth spreads faster than permission. Soon, word reached the imperial palace. The Empire's greatest secret, its mortality, had been discovered by a man armed only with equations. And for that, he would stand trial before eternity. The day they summoned him, Trantor's sky was a mirror of steel. Seldon walked through the streets of the imperial sector, his steps echoing against endless corridors of chrome and marble. Above him, hollow banners shimmered with the image of Cleon I, the Emperor Eternal, ruler of 1,000,000 worlds. The irony was almost unbearable. The air was cool, artificial. Beneath the polished calm, he could feel the Empire's pulse, the vibration of machines, the whisper of surveillance drones. Every step toward the palace felt like walking through the veins of a sleeping god. The Hall of Judgment was immense, designed to humble even the proud. Light poured from artificial suns, gilding the floor in silver. Senators lined the balconies like predators disguised as scholars. In the center, under the gaze of statues depicting ancient emperors, stood Hari Seldon, small, calm, defiant. The questioning began softly. Was he aware, they asked, that spreading apocalyptic propaganda could incite panic? Did he understand the responsibility that came with intellect? Seldon answered as a mathematician. Responsibility, he said, is accepting what the numbers reveal, whether or not we like what they say. Murmurs rippled through the hall. The chief commissioner leaned forward. You claim to predict the fate of the Empire. You claim to foresee its collapse. Do you deny it? Seldon's voice was quiet. I do not deny it. I have proven it. Gasps, outrage, a sound like the air itself holding its breath. It was not treason they feared, but truth. Because psychohistory was not mysticism, it was cold, empirical inevitability. And if it was correct, then the Empire, this glorious monument of 12 millennia, was already dead, still moving only by the inertia of its past. The Emperor himself, Cleon I, demanded a private audience. In a chamber lined with golden filigree and whispering servants, Cleon confronted the mathematician who had predicted his extinction. You speak of destiny, the Emperor said, but destiny bends to power. Do your equations account for me? Seldon met his gaze. Majesty, psychohistory does not predict individuals. It predicts masses. You may move armies, shape policy, delay the inevitable, but even you, sire, are a variable within the curve. For the first time in his reign, Cleon fell silent.
What followed was weeks of debate. The Commission for Public Safety wanted Seldon executed. The Emperor hesitated. Killing him would validate his claims. Letting him live risked spreading them, so Seldon proposed a compromise. Exile. He would leave Trantor. He would continue his work in silence, under imperial supervision, on a project that appeared harmless, an encyclopedia of all human knowledge. The commission accepted. The emperor agreed. The mathematician was spared, and beneath the surface of bureaucracy's triumph, the seeds of revolution were sown. In the archives of the university, late at night, Seldon would walk alone among endless stacks of data crystals. The air smelled faintly of ozone and dust. Each crystal contained fragments of history, the lifeblood of civilization. He would trace them with his fingers, whispering to himself, all of this will vanish. All of this must be saved. He was building a time capsule, not of stone, but of mind. In the silence of those archives, psychohistory took on a spiritual weight. It was no longer just mathematics. It was the memory of humanity refusing to die.
Our world today knows the same hunger for prediction. Data flows through servers. Algorithms analyze our desires. Governments track patterns of unrest. Every click, every choice, every emotion, quantified. We call it data science. But beneath the code lies the same dream that haunted Seldon: to turn chaos into certainty, to build safety out of statistics. Yet Seldon knew the danger. The moment prediction becomes prophecy, humanity begins to surrender its freedom. He did not want to control the future, only to guide it, gently, toward survival. That distinction would define his legacy, and nearly destroy it. In the final days before exile, Seldon's followers gathered in secret beneath the streeling dome. Dozens of scientists, historians, engineers, and philosophers, each a believer in the plan. Among them was Gall Dornick, young, brilliant, idealistic, the first to truly grasp the magnitude of psychohistory. To him, Seldon was not merely a scientist, he was a prophet of reason. "Do you truly believe the Empire will fall?" Gall once asked. Seldon smiled sadly. "Belief is irrelevant. It will fall whether we believe it or not. And the plan." "The plan is not salvation," Seldon said. "It is mercy." But not all who heard him were loyal. Within his circle lurked skeptics, spies from the Commission for Public Safety, agents tasked with monitoring the Encyclopedia Foundation. They reported everything, every shipment, every communiqué, every rumor of secret intent. And yet, Seldon's calm unnerved them. He acted not as a conspirator, but as someone already certain of victory. He once told a commission interrogator, "In every age, those who fear knowledge destroy themselves trying to silence it." The report was filed. The interrogator was never seen again. The night before departure, Seldon stood at the window of his apartment overlooking the city that had condemned him. Trantor glowed like a dying sun, its towers piercing the artificial haze. He felt no hatred, only sorrow. The Empire was magnificent, but blind. It could not see its own exhaustion. He whispered into the darkness, "You were always too perfect to last." In the room behind him, his team packed equipment. Data cores, probability tables, genetic archives, everything needed to seed the foundation. A knock at the door. It was Gall. "They've approved the relocation, Professor." "Terminus is waiting." Seldon nodded. "Good. Then let us begin the longest journey in human history, the one that leads not through space, but through time." The shuttle left Trantor at dawn. From orbit, the city shimmered, endless and eternal, the illusion of immortality. Seldon watched it fade beneath him, his reflection merging with the glittering planet below. He wondered if anyone would remember this moment, the instant the fate of the galaxy shifted. He turned to Gall. "One day," he said softly, "they'll call us traitors, then saviors, then myths, but the plan will not care. The mathematics will hold." And as the engines ignited, a quiet smile crossed his face. Because for all the power of the Empire, for all the arrogance of Cleon's throne, Seldon knew something no one else did. History had already chosen its course. In the years that followed, the foundation would rise from his vision. But that is another story, one of faith disguised as science, and of knowledge turned into power. For now, the mathematician leaves the heart of the galaxy behind. The Empire continues to shine, unaware that its epitaph has already been written, not in stone, but in equations. And far below, in the endless corridors of Trantor, the machines still hum, recording decrees for an empire that will soon forget how to listen. The fall of Trantor was not the end. It was merely the quiet beginning of something new, something impossibly fragile, hidden on the edge of the galaxy. When the imperial capital burned, when 1,000,000 bureaucrats fled into darkness, a single seed had already been planted light years away, on a barren world named Terminus. No palaces, no armies, no metals, no mines, only knowledge and a dream. Hari Seldon had designed it this way. He knew the first Galactic Empire would collapse under its own weight, but he also knew that if even a fragment of science and reason survived the coming Dark Age, humanity could rise again. Not in 30 millennia, but in 1,000 years. So the first foundation was born, a colony disguised as a team of scholars compiling an Encyclopedia Galactica, the sum total of human knowledge. It was a clever fiction, one that the Empire itself had authorized. For the dying bureaucracy, it was flattering, the idea that their age would be catalogued, remembered, preserved forever. But Seldon's true intent lay hidden in the mathematics of psychohistory. The foundation was not a memorial, it was a lifeboat. For a time, Terminus was quiet. A collection of scientists and engineers, historians and archivists, all serving a purpose they did not yet understand. The stars overhead were vast and cold, the galaxy stretched into eternity, and far away, in the ruins of Trantor, the imperial voice still claimed to rule all mankind. But empires decay faster than they imagine. Soon, the core worlds fell silent. Trade routes snapped, communication relays went dark. In the span of a century, the Empire's light dimmed to a faint ember flickering at the galaxy's heart. Terminus was alone, and that isolation was the spark that began the true rise of the Foundation. The outer planets, the barbarian kingdoms of the periphery, still feared the memory of empire. They worshipped the past but understood nothing of its science. Terminus, however, held the last living flame of reason. At first, it was weakness. Then it became power. The encyclopedists wanted to preserve knowledge. The politicians wanted to wield it. And in that crucible, the first of the Foundation's crises emerged, the first Seldon crisis. It was not a war of weapons, it was a war of ideas. When the surrounding kingdoms threatened to invade, Terminus had no ships, no guns, no armies. But they had something better. They had science, and the appearance of miracles. Salvor Hardin, the first great mayor of Terminus, understood what Seldon had meant all along. Violence, he said, is the last refuge of the incompetent. So the Foundation cloaked its knowledge in religion. They turned atomic power into a holy sacrament, technicians into priests and maintenance manuals into sacred texts. The outer worlds bowed in reverence before the magicians of Terminus, believing them to be divine, while the Foundation quietly manipulated their faith. Science had become theology. Reason had become ritual. And through it, control was reborn. It was an irony so deep it bordered on poetry. Humanity's salvation would come not through enlightenment, but through the illusion of it. The first Foundation would not conquer with fleets, but with belief. But belief, once born, has a life of its own. Even now, cracks were forming beneath the surface. For how long could truth hide behind deception? And when the next crisis came, would faith still serve reason, or consume it? For the Seldon plan had only just begun. The city of Terminus was unlike any in human history. Its towers rose from the flat gray plains like bones of a sleeping giant, gleaming white in the cold light of its small sun. At night, the atmosphere shimmered with pale auroras from the power domes that shielded its heart. There was no luxury, no opulence, only precision. Every building, every corridor, every tool existed for function, not grandeur. The air smelled faintly of ozone and iron. The sea beyond the equatorial ridge was restless, churning against metal docks. And everywhere, there was the sound of humming, generators, data cores, the pulse of a civilization trying to outthink extinction. Here, religion was a mask, but knowledge was the heartbeat. Hardin's priests spread across the periphery in ships that looked like temples, radiating atomic light, carrying holy devices that cured disease and purified air. To the barbarian kingdoms, the Foundation seemed godlike. But behind the curtain, it was all mathematics and maintenance. In the quiet of the command vaults, the scientists debated philosophy. Were they saviors or deceivers? Builders or manipulators? Did the end, the preservation of civilization, justify the means? Every empire in history had claimed to act for the greater good. Rome had spoken of order. the British of civilization, America of freedom. But all empires serve themselves in the end. Could the Foundation escape that pattern, or was it destined to become yet another tyranny, masked by intellect instead of armies? The parallels with our world today are uncanny. Corporations born in garages now rule continents. Algorithms predict our desires as Seldon once predicted history. And like the Foundation, they promise enlightenment while quietly shaping belief. Science becomes marketing, data becomes prophecy, and the priests of progress wear the robes of technology. The Foundation's rise mirrors our own. Its knowledge was absolute, its morality uncertain. It preserved reason by weaponizing it, because sometimes truth alone cannot save humanity. It must first survive humanity. But survival breeds power, and power breeds corruption. The religion of science became an empire of trade. The missionaries of the Foundation became merchants, and their temples became factories and starports. Soon, the rulers of the periphery found themselves dependent on Foundation technology. Atomic engines, shield generators, medical units, all gifts from the Foundation, each with a catch. To service them, only Foundation-trained priests could be trusted. To interpret their holy devices, only Foundation manuals could be read. In this web of faith and commerce, the Foundation became indispensable, and with indispensability came dominance. Terminus, once a lonely colony, now commanded the economic veins of half the galaxy. The priesthood was fading, replaced by something far more efficient: profit. But profit, too, has its crises, and Seldon's mathematics foresaw it all. In the vault beneath the time vault, the chamber sealed since the founding, a hologram flickered to life, exactly as predicted. Hari Seldon's voice echoed through the years. You have weathered the first crisis. You have used the weapons of superstition and faith. The next will test your wisdom, not your cunning. The crowd of officials and scientists listened in silence. The plan was unfolding. Yet the irony was unbearable. They were free only by following a dead man's script. Was this destiny or servitude? Could humanity ever truly choose its future, if that future was already calculated? The lights of Terminus glowed brighter that night, as if defying the question. But somewhere in the darkness, new powers were awakening, powers that no equation had yet predicted. The plan was safe, for now. The morning air over Terminus was thin and cold. Salvor Hardin stood on the balcony of the mayoral spire, watching the mist rise from the metallic plains. His reflection shimmered faintly in the dome's glass, half man, half myth. He had become the first ruler of a world that claimed to reject rulers. Behind him, aides whispered about border tensions, merchant routes, and the unrest brewing among the priesthood. Hardin barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a fleet of barbarian ships had appeared days ago, now halted, waiting for his next move. He smiled faintly. They believed him a god. He was only human. Inside the temple labs, acolytes in white robes calibrated ancient devices. The air vibrated with static energy. They bowed before the glowing reactors, chanting prayers that were, in truth, calibration sequences. One young technician hesitated, his faith faltering as he glimpsed the equations beneath the illusion. "Do we deceive them?" he whispered. An elder smiled sadly. "We teach them to believe in something that works." In another corner of the Foundation, Hober Mallow studied trade manifests under dim light. He saw what others missed. Power lay not in temples or equations, but in commerce. He would soon become the first merchant prince, a ruler without armies who controlled entire systems through trade alone. For him, faith was obsolete. The new god was economy. But the shift would tear the Foundation apart. Hardin's theocracy would clash with Mallow's capitalism. The balance between knowledge and morality would fracture. In the shadows of the time vault, a caretaker cleaned the dust from Seldon's sarcophagus of light. She was young, barely 20, and wondered what it felt like to know the future. When the hologram flickered once more, she froze. Seldon's image, half glitched, turned toward her as if aware. The greatest danger, his voice murmured through the static, is not ignorance, but certainty. Then the vault went dark. Outside, the sky above Terminus crackled with lightning. Signals from the outer systems hinted at rebellion. A distant Empire fragment was stirring again, its last generals dreaming of vengeance. And among the stars, something else moved, something that could feel the future, not calculate it. The Foundation's first age was ending. The next crisis would not come from ignorance, but from genius. For somewhere beyond the rim, destiny itself was beginning to mutate. In the centuries after the first Foundation rose to dominance, another force had been watching, invisible, inaudible, yet always there. While the world celebrated science, trade, and the rational mind, another kind of intelligence moved in secret, guarding the plan that held civilization together. The Second Foundation, whispered of in legend, existed at the farthest edge of the galaxy, at Star's End, as Seldon had encoded it. Few knew what that meant. Fewer still understood why it must remain hidden. Its founders were the final disciples of Hari Seldon, men and women trained not in machines, but in minds. They were mentalics, telepaths, empathic manipulators, the next step in the evolution of humanity itself. Their purpose was simple and terrifying, to safeguard the Seldon plan, even if it meant shaping the thoughts of an entire galaxy. The first Foundation was built on physical power, technology, science, and trade. The Second Foundation was built on psychic power, emotion, intuition, and control. Together, they formed the two halves of Seldon's dream, the hands that built civilization and the shadows that kept it from destroying itself. For centuries, they worked in silence. When the first Foundation faced crisis, they watched. When leaders rose and fell, they nudged ever so slightly, steering humanity back toward the plan's invisible rails. They did not conquer, they corrected. They whispered into the hearts of kings, soothed the rage of warlords, and silenced those whose genius might derail destiny. It was a science of control, not compassion. And yet, to the Second Foundationers, it was mercy. For they had seen the mathematics, they had seen the future, and they knew that the slightest deviation could unravel 10,000 years of progress. They believed themselves shepherds, but history would remember them as gods or devils. For what is freedom if your very thoughts can be rewritten? The first Foundation, grown mighty and arrogant, believed it ruled the galaxy through reason. But reason had a master, and the master lived unseen. Even the phrase "Star's End" was a deception, for the Second Foundation did not dwell at the galaxy's edge, but at its heart, near the remnants of Trantor, hidden beneath the ruins of Empire. The Watchers were not far away. They were everywhere. They saw the Foundation's triumphs and its creeping corruption. They saw the rise of ambition, greed, and ego. And then they saw something Seldon's mathematics had not predicted. A single man, a mutation, an anomaly in the perfect order. The mule, a being with the power to twist emotion itself, not through science, but through sheer psychic force. He conquered not with fleets, but with despair. And for the first time in 5 centuries, the Seldon plan began to collapse. The Second Foundation had waited in silence for generations. Now it was time to act. The shadows would finally move. Imagine standing beneath the ruined metal sky of Trantor centuries after its fall. The once golden capital lies silent, a labyrinth of rust and ghosts. But deep beneath its crust, where the old data cores still hum faintly, there is light, a chamber, circular, silent. Here, minds meet without speaking. The air vibrates faintly, like a pulse beneath the skin. Dozens of figures sit in meditative stillness, their eyes half closed. Their thoughts interlace in patterns of shimmering energy, invisible yet tangible, a symphony of intention. This is the Second Foundation in session. No words, no sound, just pure consciousness weaving probability into harmony. They perceive the galaxy not as a map, but as a pattern of emotions, fears, and ambitions, a living organism made of thought, and like surgeons of the soul, they adjust it. One whisper at a time, they erase a tyrant's rage before it becomes genocide. They plant doubt in a demagogue before he ignites a crusade. They comfort a grieving queen so her tears do not drown her empire. Each act is invisible. Each choice carries a moral weight heavier than any weapon. Outside this chamber, the galaxy spins unaware, billions of people laughing, crying, fighting, never knowing their destinies are being curated by unseen minds. Is this benevolence or tyranny? Philosophers have long asked, what is the nature of freedom? Is it the right to choose one's own path, even if that path leads to ruin? Or is it the safety of being guided towards survival, even at the cost of autonomy? The Second Foundation chose the latter, and in their cold logic, they mirrored the future we now inhabit. For our world, too, hums with invisible influence. Algorithms shape what we read, whom we love, what we fear. Corporations predict our desires before we feel them. Governments anticipate unrest before a single protest begins. We are free, yet we are monitored. We are individuals, yet our behavior is mapped, forecasted, and manipulated. The Second Foundation, in essence, exists already, not in telepaths, but in code, not in minds, but in data. Perhaps Hari Seldon's greatest prophecy was not of psychohistory, but of the psychotechnology to come. The math of the masses is the algorithm of our age. Still, even the Second Foundation feared what they had become. Their oldest members remembered the purity of Seldon's vision, a world reborn through knowledge, not coercion. But the younger Mentalics, born into secrecy and control, saw themselves as guardians of a higher truth. They were the plan's custodians, the silent hand behind destiny. Until the mule arrived. His power was raw, emotional, unquantifiable. He could reshape loyalty, erase love, instill devotion, with a single glance. Against such a force, the Second Foundation's centuries of calculation meant nothing. Their agents scattered, their control crumbled, their secret nearly died. For the first time, the shadows trembled. And in that trembling, a dangerous question arose. If even the mind cannot be trusted, what remains of the plan? Her name was Arcadia Durrell, and she was 16 when she first heard the whispers. Not from others, from within. A faint echo, like the memory of someone else's thought. She was not trained, not initiated, but she was born of the Foundation's bloodline, a descendant of those who had touched the Second Foundation's reach. And now, as the mule's shadow spread across the stars, she felt it calling. Far from Terminus, in a forgotten sector of the galaxy, a small ship drifted among dying suns. Inside sat Preem Palver, one of the hidden speakers of the Second Foundation, a quiet farmer by appearance, a master telepath beneath the mask. He could sense the panic sweeping through the plan, the psychic storm unleashed by the mule's conquest. Around him, the minds of his order trembled. Some wanted to fight the mule openly, others argued for retreat, for survival, for patience. Palver listened, not to their words, but to their emotions. Fear, doubt, guilt. He could feel them like smoke in the air. He closed his eyes and reached outward, past stars, past space, into the mind of the anomaly itself. For a moment, he touched the mule's consciousness. It was not evil, it was pain. An orphaned mind, twisted by isolation, terrified of being alone. His conquest was not hatred, it was loneliness weaponized. Palver recoiled, tears streaming from his eyes. He understood then that no equation could contain the human heart. No plan could calculate sorrow. No psychohistory could predict love. When the mule died years later, the galaxy breathed again. But something had changed. The Second Foundation had learned humility. They no longer saw themselves as gods. They became ghosts. Arcadia grew into a scholar, then an explorer, her mind sharper than any machine. She uncovered traces of the Second Foundation's work, the edits, the mental fingerprints, the erased memories. And she asked the forbidden question, who guards the guardians? The answer, whispered across light years, came from the shadows themselves. We guard each other, but even they knew it was a lie. For every guardian, there must be a will to dominate. And for every dominated mind, there comes the spark of rebellion. In the silence of space, 1,000 minds dreamed of freedom. They would one day reshape the galaxy again, not through war, but through awakening. The second foundation endured, but its survival was not victory. It was the quiet recognition of a truth older than any plan, that even in a universe ruled by mathematics, the soul remains unpredictable. The shadows have held the plan together for 1,000 years, but soon, the stars themselves will test it. In every age, there comes one who should not exist, a variable that no equation can contain, a thought that breaks through prediction, a heart that defies mathematics. His name was never recorded in the official annals of the Empire, for even memory feared him. He was called the Mule. He was born in obscurity, some say on a backwater planet forgotten by both Empire and Foundation. He had no lineage, no wealth, no destiny. And yet, within him burned a mutation that defied the laws of Seldon's psychohistory. He could bend emotion as others bend metal. He could erase loyalty, ignite devotion, and drown entire civilizations in despair. No computer could predict him, for he was not a number. He was an anomaly. And so, in a galaxy ruled by equations and probability, the unthinkable happened. Destiny broke. At first, his rise was a rumor. A rebel fleet here, a conquered planet there. The first Foundation dismissed him as a provincial warlord, a symptom of the outer chaos. But then the reports grew darker. Whole systems fell without resistance. Armies laid down their arms and begged to serve him. Generals betrayed their comrades. Worlds once loyal to Terminus opened their gates and cheered his name. The Mule never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His gift, the ability to feel the emotions of others and reshape them, was absolute. Where psychohistory saw masses, he saw hearts. Where Seldon saw probabilities, he saw fear. And fear was the one constant no plan could eliminate. Soon, the Seldon plan faltered. The vault opened, as it always did in times of crisis, and Hari Seldon's hologram appeared before the Foundation's leaders. But this time, his message did not match reality. He spoke of trade wars that had never happened, of political conflicts that had been overwritten by something far stranger. The plan was blind. For the first time in centuries, the future no longer matched the mathematics. The room fell silent. The crowd stared at the empty projection, realizing the truth. They were alone. The safety net of destiny was gone. In that silence, the Mule's shadow spread. He swept through the periphery like a storm. Terminus fell. Trantor, already a graveyard of steel, trembled once more beneath his fleets. For a brief, blinding moment, it seemed the galaxy had traded one empire for another. Faster, colder, born of grief instead of glory. But the Mule did not seek conquest for power. He sought it to fill an emptiness he could not understand. His gift had made him omnipotent, yet utterly alone. No one could love him freely. Every affection, every smile, every word of loyalty was a reflection of his own manipulation. He could command obedience, but never companionship. He could build an empire, but never find peace. And so he wandered the galaxy like a god haunted by the echo of his own voice. The Seldon plan was broken. The second Foundation, hidden and afraid, moved at last. In the darkness of deep space, a ship carried Beta Darrell, a woman of the first Foundation, and Ebling Miss, the scholar obsessed with rediscovering the second. They believed they could find the hidden guardians and beg them to restore the plan. But the Mule was hunting them. Beta saw the tragedy in his eyes even as she feared him. He wanted her to understand him, to see beyond his mutation. For a heartbeat she did. And in that heartbeat, she realized the truth. The Mule's victory would mean the end of humanity's freedom forever. So with trembling hands, she killed the man who loved her, not the conqueror, the man. The galaxy shuddered. The anomaly was gone. and somewhere, in the silent chambers of the second foundation, a whisper passed among the telepaths. The plan breathes again. But it was not the same plan. Something had changed in the mathematics. The equations still worked, but now, woven between their lines, was a subtle awareness. The plan had seen its own fragility. It could predict the many, but never the one. Years passed. The mule's empire collapsed as swiftly as it had risen. His generals turned on one another. His fleets dissolved into dust. Yet his legend endured, a reminder that no destiny is unbreakable. The first foundation rebuilt, stronger, harder, more ambitious. The second foundation faded deeper into myth, guarding the galaxy from within its dreams. But both had learned the same truth. Control is never complete. Even the perfect plan must bow to the chaos of the human heart. And in that chaos, hope is born. The camera drifts through the ruins of Trantor once more. The metal planes glisten beneath the dying light of its sun. Vines crawl over the shattered domes. The once mighty capital lies still. But in the distance, faintly, something moves. A human figure, walking across the dust with a data tablet in hand. A new age begins, as all ages do, with the remnants of the old. From these ashes will rise new empires, new foundations, new faiths. And perhaps, somewhere, another Seldon, another mind dreaming of saving mankind from itself. Because that is the paradox of civilization. We fall so that we can rise again. We destroy so that we may remember what was worth building. We lose control so that freedom can find its way through the cracks. The stars turn overhead, silent witnesses to our endless cycle. Empire, collapse, rebirth. And beneath it all, the same ancient question echoes through time. Can destiny be written, or does humanity, in the end, always choose its own ruin? Seldon believed in the mathematics of fate. The mule proved the power of the unpredictable. Both were right, both were wrong. Because the future, any future, is never a certainty. It is a story rewritten with every choice, every rebellion, every heartbeat. And maybe that's what saves us. If every empire must fall, can even our own world escape the same fate?